Excellent. Welcome to TADSummit Innovators. I'm really excited to have Dan Gill. He is the CEO and founder of Augnet, who have a quite impressive executive team and advisory team. When I first read it, I was like, wow, you can't get better than that. So Dan, please introduce yourself and a little bit about Augnet, please.
Sure. No, thank you very much. So Augnet, a relatively young company running for about 5 years. We're backed by a VC out of the UK. My background prior to Augnet, I was relatively early on at the Skype team, looking after global carrier relations there. And Augnet was really set up to answer some of the challenges that I was having at Skype around governance in the SMS supply chain. How do we really know how one provider is performing against another?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a key. And that remains, you would think in such a mature industry, it would have been solved by now. But anyway, one of the hot topics we're seeing popping up all over the place is AIT. Now, artificially inflated traffic has a number of sources. I know this is a bit like asking how long is a piece of string and ask me all, tell me all about the different lengths of string. However, what is AIT and what are its main sources?
Yeah, I think a lot of people misunderstand AIT. I think people perceive AIT as what it was only a few years ago,
Yes.
which was generating a lot of fake accounts in various apps,
Yeah.
and really getting that app to slam SMS traffic into the SMS ecosystem, typically over a weekend.
Yeah.
And the people in the supply chain would benefit from that. If the person in the supply chain is originating the AIT, they're making extremely high margins. But actually, what we've seen in the recent sort of, for particularly several months, but really what started a few years ago, is that people are using AIT at a much more sort of delicate level. That they're really only generating very small proportions of traffic, but they do that to engineer, to manipulate the routing algorithms that enterprises use, and indeed some of the CPaaS companies who are using conversion ratios. These are easily manipulated to make one supplier look more favorable than their competitors.
Gotcha.
And that I think is the more damaging type of AIT, because it just throws any form of routing governance or routing analysis. It just throws it under the bus, and it's just putting those controls firmly in the hands of the fraudsters.
Gotcha. So the first topic is basically what Elon Musk was ranting about, the $60 million that was being stolen from him from 250 carriers. But that's really, and of course, that's a complex ecosystem. It's not really the carriers doing that. There's middlemen creating the fake accounts. There's dodgy characters on the edges of the ecosystem, sort of, making money out of this. Maybe let's just nail that one in terms of some of the sophistication there to help people understand that, shall we say, the legacy AIT. And I think focusing on the current tools and what's happening there, I think is very important.
And exactly what you said. We see very little evidence that mobile network operators are generating traffic to their own networks.
Yeah.
We do have multiple MVNOs generating traffic, but one of the extra things that has got to be considered is that the supply chain is often multiple suppliers long. So in fairness to whoever the suppliers are who directly deal with Twitter, it's less likely to be those guys directly, and probably their onward suppliers. And it can be a very convoluted, confusing environment, because you'll end up having a particular supply chain that looks to be the best quality because they're manipulating the conversion ratios.
Yes.
But because there's a bunch of excess margin in there from the AIT, they're subsidizing the authentic traffic. So they're the best quality and they're the lowest rates. And if you're a buyer in Twitter or someone else above in the supply chain, it just looks very attractive, and it's a very brave person who decides not to go with
that. Exactly. So well, one of the countries that was named on Twitter was Nepal. A ton of traffic was being generated there. Well, I think it's still disappeared now because they just cut the country off. But if it's not the MNOs, and it's maybe not, the global, aggregators, then who are they and how are they inserting themselves into this ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, it's as we all know, it's a very the whole industry, the wholesale industry, is a very very much based on relationships.
Yes.
So it's totally feasible for someone with a good reputation in the industry to start their own aggregation business, take some hosted switching network, and literally within a week they could be up and running, have some wholesale connections with some big CPaaS players, and be offering some really cheeky rates, some really low rates. And it can be as simple as receiving traffic from one big CPaaS company, sending it to another big CPaaS company, making what on first level looks like a loss there. But if they're then supplementing that by this generated traffic that's also coming to them, they're netting off, and it looks like it's a very good deal. So these companies can be spun up in a very, very short manner of time.
Gotcha. So it's down to individual levels. It's basically a player that is doing a side hustle because they've realized, well, it's relatively easy to play one side off the other, inflate, and then make margin not on the core traffic but on the side traffic.
No, exactly, and I also think that the barriers to entry to doing this type of fraudulent traffic, it's so low that now you don't even need a company to do it. You can have an employee in a company, in a CPaaS company, and they're able to be a fairly major enabler of this type of traffic. And at the end of the quarter, they're going to look like the golden person because the accounts that they had at the beginning of the quarter are now sending a lot more traffic because they're cheaper, they're better quality. They're also lining their own pockets from the side hustle deal that they've got going on.
And this is, as always in telco, this isn't new. I remember a couple of decades ago, there was the international toll bypass where, again, there's that market. You've got all these calls coming into high international rate countries like the Caribbean, and they'd use SIM boxes. So they take advantage of local calls being relatively cheap, and they terminate, they bid for and they get termination for international routes coming in. Quality wouldn't necessarily be as good, but the pricing was just so attractive. And because it's detected using SIM boxes, so it's a small country, it's the telco, and either a relative of the person doing the bypass for fraud, or maybe somebody within there would say, "Oh, you know what? We've got some SIM box detection people coming in. You might want to turn it off this week." And then dodge. It was. And I remember some of the companies I used to I knew were just. It was like just trying to keep it secret. Just the PO. It was like, look, don't use our name. Don't say the purpose. Unless your organization doesn't know, our services are useless. It was tough.
And those SIM providers, SIM farm providers, they typically moved into the A2P space, same type of service.
Exactly.
But some of them were pretty running this at scale, and they had the SIM boxes driving around in vans to be mobile. They were faking other traffic, data and voice calls to make it look like regular SIMs.
That's it. And controlling, it was just a high volume user. That's all. So it appears like.
And interestingly, you still have those characters.
Yes.
I feel that SIM farm isn't as big issue now as what it was even a year ago.
Okay.
We certainly see a lot less of it. But those characters seem to have moved into AIT.
Gotcha.
And more worryingly is though at that end of the marketplace, that end of the spectrum, the authentic traffic that's coming through them that they're making a loss on, they're taking that data and through typically APIs, a real-time data transfer, they're selling that data, and the risk is there that it's an old-fashioned confidence con. If I download a food delivery app and then 40 seconds later I'm getting a phone call from David saying they're from that food delivery app, my one-time password is 5678, and I seem to have done a typo on my credit card. Could I go through security and they'll sort it out for me?
Exactly.
It sounds incredibly convincing, and people are buying that data.
Yes.
So they're initially selling these SMSs at a loss, but through a combination of AIT, maybe a little bit of fake DLR, old-fashioned fake DLR in there, and the data, it ends up being far more profitable than what a white provider could ever compete with.
So it's quite sophisticated then. So it's all the user data that's pumping through SMS is what's monetized, not even the traffic.
Absolutely.
I think it's both.
You can, even if you're not doing, AIT, there's money to be made from selling that data. Particularly, some of these guys are doing revenue share with the fraudsters.
Yes.
So they do account takeover fraud, credit card fraud, and all that sort of stuff.
Gotcha.
But my prediction is that over the next year, I think we'll be talking about that type of fraud very closely aligned with AIT.
Gotcha.
It's typically blended in there, but I think that's something that, along with AIT, that we'll be talking about a lot more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense given the trajectory, because it's a moving target. It's whack-a-mole. I guess when you plug one hole.
And ultimately, if I'm a dirty provider, if I'm a fraudster, other fraudsters are going to be undercutting me. That they've got more room to subsidize and win that traffic. If you don't have the authentic traffic, you've got no play. You need that authentic traffic.
Exactly.
So it will force me as a not so bad fraudster to be even worse, just to stay in business.
Gotcha. So I'd just like to jump back a little bit to Augnet. So how are you monitoring all these flows? How are you determining, how SMS are being delivered through these different routes?
Yeah, we've got two technologies that are in play. One is a vast network of endpoints.
Gotcha.
So a mixture of real mobile phones that we have an SDK embedded into.
Gotcha.
And the other is IoT boards, typically with eSIMs.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of endpoints, a very large sample size that's receiving real SMSs.
Yeah.
We initially designed this service 4 or 5 years ago
to
monitor SIM farm, to monitor non-delivery of messages, fake DLR.
Yes.
I think particularly in the last 2 years, we've seen quite a rapid migration. We're seeing less and less of that old school fraud, and more now AIT. So our more recent sort of patent, or the more recent technology we're deploying, is a way for us to authenticate a mobile phone before an SMS is submitted into the network. We know if it's a virtual device, if it's a real device, and build a confidence score around it.
Gotcha.
And then once we've done that, an SMS can be connected to it in traditional format, but we also are able to encrypt messages. That authentication of a device is a critical component of being able to encrypt messages.
And that's because it has your SDK in. So whether it's a particular web app or an enterprise client for enterprise communication, because it's got your SDK in, you can confirm this is a real mobile phone. It's not basically sort of up in the cloud, and then you can, because of that, not only monitor the traffic, as you said, non-delivery and the rest, and the routing, but you can then add services on top in terms of authenticating endpoints, but also encrypting, end-to-end encryption. So the only place you see the content is on the device itself, in the app, sorry.
Exactly. And this isn't an enterprise-only thing. You know, we can also sit as a SIM applet. So a mobile network operator can do an over-the-air update to all of their SIM cards.
Gotcha.
Understood. Out there.
Yeah, because that's always the challenge with SIM apps, you know, because telcos could monitor the end-to-end performance, you know, in terms of which are the best devices, because we know what happens. People who have Apple get crap reception compared to most Android phones. And they should publish tables of, if you want, you know, a good device to our network, here's the list. You can have all that ranking. They can know where maybe, you know, there's implementation issues with particular, you know, sort of lags, you know, because of the base station or something. There's so much they could gather.
That's a good point. So we have that data. We've never looked at it. So I would very quickly be able to ascertain the difference between particular Android devices, how they compare versus iOS versus so on, so on, so on.
Cool. So that's good. So I just want to make sure we drive home, you know, how, you know, when you say enterprise, I mean, this could be like a big web brand. So it could be like a sort of, you know, a Google, Facebook or whatever. So, you know, how is AIT influencing their routing decision? So maybe just go through that method just to drive home this, you know, how AIT is being used to grab what is generally high margin traffic from some of the big web brands.
Yeah, and I really think there's quite a wake-up call is required. In these large corporate apps or tech companies who typically send the majority of the traffic, if you go back a couple of years ago, they were really looking at maybe using some testing tools, maybe looking at the DLRs they were getting, using the conversion ratios. Now, all of those can be manipulated. And you've still got this element of trust. But that's also a terrible thing to have, because I might trust the next person I deal with on the other side of the table, but you typically don't have visibility of what's beyond.
Exactly.
And you know, trust is only a +1 connection. I think you know, the industry is crying out for some way to provide a kite mark or accreditation, and that was really the original vision of what Augnet was set up to do.
Gotcha. Understood.
Well, there was a meeting today. There was a meeting today with a couple of hundred parties discussing the insanity of AIT. Look, it's destroying the industry. Let's just flip to the financial side. You know, I've got, you know, there's companies that I'm talking to that have lost half their traffic because of this. So you've got some people blaming some of these mobile operators with these gateway deals, but, you know, there's companies that are terrified. And the drop in traffic and the drop in revenue with everything that's going on with Twilio being the center of the universe is going to lead to a cannibalization of the industry. I mean, look, you got Doug Gardner on your board of advisors, which is one of the most amazing things I've seen, because I know Doug for years, built Twilio. And I'm pretty sure Twilio's trying to reach out to him right now saying, please come help save us in the US again, if they're smart. So, I mean, obviously what you have is the real deal. Your board of advisors, your product here. I think people, you know, look, a lot of these companies are terrified. They're terrified. I talk to these people. I talk to, obviously, we've got hundreds of people calling us, giving us information, wanted us to get involved in AIT. They're screaming for it. But from a Wall Street perspective, from a money perspective, when the minute you go from here to here, back here, you're done.
Yeah.
So a lot of these companies are done. Some of the biggest aggregators are done. I just can't believe nobody's come try to buy you out. Like nobody's even come knocking on your door to take you out. Because truth of the matter is, who really cares if Google's getting robbed? Honestly, nobody cares. But Google now cares. Google now cares. It's just like the ad fraud. Nobody
Yeah.
cares if there's
Yeah.
$200 billion in ad fraud. They're like, you're going to pay for it? Go ahead. But now you've got a problem with all the aggregators. You call them CPaaS companies. I call them aggregators. And the moving of gazillions of messages across the board, they're all doing it. Somebody had told me recently that Google had a bunch of them and told one of them, well, you're the best of the bad bunch. They're all doing it. They're all trying to manipulate it. They can't stop.
I think we're at a really interesting point in time, because there's this huge thing with conflicting interests, right?
Yes.
If you got one of these big tech companies originating the traffic and you got them in a room with their direct suppliers, let's say they deal with 30 suppliers, and then those 30 suppliers, you then deal with all of their supply chain, you've got upwards of several hundred suppliers sharing that traffic.
Yeah.
Who cares whether this tech company is having traffic generated or not? Only that tech company, because everybody else, knowingly or unknowingly, everybody else is benefiting from that.
Yeah.
And I say we're at an interesting point in time because I think they could have hid behind that in previous years. That's becoming harder and harder. The enterprise community is becoming a lot more wiser, a lot more switched on to what's wrong with SMS. And no longer can a really, let's say a company who really aspires to be good, competing against a really shady fraudster. There's no way for an enterprise to differentiate between the two. There's no metrics, there's no source of truth, particularly with the amount of manipulation of data that's going on.
Yeah.
So I think, you've hit a really good point there, that I think we're almost at ground zero for companies have to choose what path they take. And by the way, one of the sort of key points in this is if a company says they're white and they aspire to be good, how can they prove that? Like, they've got no data to understand what's going on within their ecosystem. And even if they have an idea, if they have a hypothesis, they still need to double down on getting to the bottom of that data, because they need to understand what their competitors are doing. And if they genuinely are better than their competitors, then they need to be holding that up and saying, hey, enterprise community, look at us. We genuinely are better.
And you prove that. So basically, you're the Alan Quayle, because I call Alan Santa Claus. You know if somebody's been naughty or nice of the industry. So you can basically, you know what everybody's doing. You know what amount of traffic or AIT they're all sending.
Yeah.
I mean, I envision a place where Augnet becomes the place where the enterprises say, okay, where am I getting screwed? Where am I not getting screwed? Who's screwing the most? People in the industry, everybody's pointing at everybody. I get messages every day long on who's bad. This guy bad. This guy did it. That guy did it. That guy. Everybody. It's everybody. So we've just come on to this topic of AIT, and luckily found you. And the minute I saw Doug Gardner on your board, I'm like, Doug would never be on a board of this guy if he didn't know exactly what he was doing. You know what I mean? So there's no question you're the real deal. How do we get that messaging out? How do you get? Is it through the enterprise? Because that's a harder sell. A lot of these enterprise people, they don't care. They're hitting their numbers, just like ad fraud. They don't really care. I know Google's being aggressive. Meta's being aggressive. But Meta's also hiring, has different advisors that are in the industry that are all fraudsters. All these routing guys. They're all out there like heroes. They know how to play the game. So the gig is up. The gig is up, basically.
Yeah, and we're essentially an R&D company. We've been funded a good few £1 million by UK government. We have a so-called knowledge-intensive sort of status, and the funding we've got has been based on the nature of the R&D work that we do and the intelligence we get. And what we're really looking to do now is to partner or actually be acquired by someone who has that go to market channel, who has that distribution. We're current funding environment. Even if we got the money, it would take a long time to grow that out independently. And what we would much rather do is put this technology into the hands of the industry and clean it up effectively. Like, I think there is a real risk that we've talked about the evaporation of SMS traffic over the years, but never has that risk been greater because enterprise are more aware about the total lack of
it's
governance.
evaporated. It's evaporated in half of what I'm being told by some of the largest companies. You're going to start seeing it on earnings reports coming out soon. So this now goes to where my mind is always at, which is on finance and Wall Street, which, by the way, Alan, Tata's down 6% already. The short is on with them. With the cholera disaster.
Well, they're shorting themselves as well. So
yeah, but cholera too. They got some really smart guys over there. That are running a lot of this AIT too. They're all doing it at the end of the day. It's at what levels are acceptable. So at what point do they cannibalize themselves, Daniel, or what?
That's another worrying point you said. So we're all, I think, generally aware of the statement that Elon Musk said just over a year ago, that he was talking about this amount of generated traffic through Twitter. But there was one sentence on the back end of that where he said, we accept a certain volume of shenanigans happening. That happens. The issue is that even if it's a few percent, that's controlling the routing algorithm. Exactly. So we can't accept that.
Correct.
It's not that we're losing a few $1 million here and there. It's that your entire governance around your routing engine is wrecked. Someone else is in the pilot seat.
Exactly. So who should, I mean, from your perspective, because you've been thinking about this problem, and when you found it, getting the certification, the accreditation, so you can say you're white, but we can prove we're white because we expect everyone in our supply chain to only use accredited
I think TADSummit, I think we should do it because nobody else is going to do it. None of the book clubs. MEF's not going to do it. They got cholera on their board. Where are they going? And you know what I mean? So a lot of these people will pay them not to get this. They don't want.
I agree with you.
They don't want Augnet. They don't want Augnet.
But
they don't want it, but they should want it because anybody who really has a long tail in this industry and wants to grow and wants to take advantage of whether Twilio implodes or not needs to pay attention to this.
Exactly.
All the aggregators. Yeah. So look, SMS is under attack.
Because when I saw
important.
Because when I saw Augnet's proposition, I was like, well, why doesn't Google? Because it's got so much crap. Even 10% of its traffic is a significant number. So, and you can most probably drop that drastically.
I think Google's got their own agenda with RCS and loves what's going on. I think other enterprises would be more apt to want this. I think some of the mid-range to larger enterprises and even smaller enterprises want to know this because that money means a lot to them.
Exactly.
Google, as you know, their whole play is to just kill SMS and own it. So,
own it.
So where they
own SMS,
own it, own it. You know
There's also different ways
to
distribute this service. This could be distributed like a HLR service, where an enterprise would do that lookup, but they can keep their own suppliers. They don't have to change anything there, but they can do this lookup service before submitting the SMS. MNOs could do this independently. If there's CPaaS or aggregators who wanted to stick their heads up above the parapet and say, no, we actually are white, and here's some evidence to say how we're better than anyone else.
Exactly.
Yeah, so there's any number of ways.
So fascinating.
No, this is really cool. Because
I think we're going to be having Daniel on for a lot of weeks.
Well, we haven't even touched this end-to-end encryption and the use cases, all the geofencing, all the SMS over IP, or is network aware stuff.
It's an introduction to being clean.
Exactly.
Like we did with the USA. I mean, and like we're trying to do there with our messaging monopolies piece and our other piece. So I think maybe we need to do a piece on this.
I agree.
You need to get the writing.
Yeah, we'll do. But I do. It's just how it is. Because through Dan, I've really understood, especially with the routing manipulation, because that is insidious and it's tiny percentages of traffic, and you can quite easily hamper your competitors. So there's lots of ways, and as a result, you can gain lion's share of a big web brands traffic and be making money hand over fist with that. So this,
which is still all a race to zero to begin with. So now you're talking about the margins that used to be 30, 40% down to 10, 15% on an aggregator side. Now you added all this fluff that added to their margins.
Yeah.
You got a big problem here.
Yeah.
These companies have a big problem, and you know who I'm talking to out there, because a lot of you are my friends. You need to pay attention to this. You guys need to get on the right ship. With this.
This is something that can be demonstrated as well. With the correct approvals in place, we can demonstrate AIT and control the routing. If someone currently has 93% conversion and they want 95%, we can land that every time. Totally manipulated.
Yeah.
But if we're not showing that to an enterprise and we were running that behind the scenes, that puts amazing controls and dictatorship in our hands for that supply chain.
Exactly. But it's just like a HLR lookup. You can just do the verify, and then that chain is verified so that the traffic is being delivered directly. And the thing that scares me the most is because most of the data is going through basically unencrypted. It means you've got, as you said, bad entities that are using the data for a whole range of fraud, and fraud is where they're making the money. The AIT and the stuff they're doing there, that's just to get access to all that data. And it means SMS is now like the web.
Yeah, there's a terribly misaligned perception where the average person on the street, they trust SMS.
Yeah,
I think I'm right in saying it's perceived to be the most trusted mechanism for customer engagement. And I think it's probably the one that's most abused. I think encryption is a topic for another day, perhaps. But
exactly. That's what the web does. The reason is at the moment it's all in the clear. So as more players go in, as more players see bad actors see the money they can make. I mean, things just move like that. So the timelines you're quoting in 2 years ago, it was this. Currently, we're using AIT for route manipulation, but by next year, late this year, because we're just into 2024, we could see a whole host of fraud being kicked off with account takeover and the rest, to the point whereby people don't trust SMS. Just like when on the PSTN, when the call comes in, if it's not in your address list, you would ignore it. They can give you a voice message.
And, as I touched on earlier, that the barriers to entry are so low. I think if you go back only a few years ago, it typically took some orchestration from a company to enable this type of fraud, to align the different people to make it happen. You just don't need that anymore. You can have an account manager sitting at their desk in one of the whitest CPaaS companies and still be doing this.
Exactly. That's an excellent point. And with that, we'll have to say thank you so much, Dan. We will definitely have you on back on very soon. And I wish you a great evening.
We got to write a piece.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. We will.
And follow up.
Yeah. Speak to you soon, guys. Bye-bye.
Guys.